Hey there, my name is Jodi Picoult. I am so glad that you have all chosen to read Small Great Things. It means a great deal to me. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about where this book came from. I tried to write a book about racism over 20 years ago when I had heard a story on the news that affected me deeply about an African American undercover cop who had been shot 4 times in the back by white colleagues. I tried to write a book and I failed miserably. I couldn't seem to find the right voice, the right characters, and I really questioned myself. I'm a white woman who grew up with privilege. Did I even have the right to write about racism? What on earth was I going to tell people of color that they didn't already know? Well, flash forward to 2012. I came across yet another story about racism. It was an African American nurse in Flint, Michigan, who had helped deliver the son of a white man. And in the aftermath, this man called in her supervisor and said, "I don't want her or anyone who looks like her touching my kid." He pushed up his sleeve to reveal a swastika tattoo. The hospital wound up putting a note in the baby's file saying no African American personnel to touch this infant. The nurse sued the hospital. She settled out of court. I hope she got a big payout. But it made me wonder, what if that nurse had been the only one left alone with the child when something went wrong? What if, as a result of that, she wound up having to choose between following her supervisor's orders or saving a child's life? What if she wound up on trial, defended by a white public defender who, like me, like a lot of my friends, would never consider herself to be a racist? And what if I could tell the book in alternating points of view, that of the African American nurse, the white supremacist father, and the white public defender, as they all grappled with their ideas about race and power and privilege? And suddenly I knew I was going to finish this book. I no longer was writing a book to try to tell people of color what their lives are like. That's never going to be my story to tell. I was writing to people who look like me, people with light skin, who can very easily point to a white supremacist and say, "Oh, that's a racist," but have a much harder time pointing to themselves and saying the same thing. I learned so much writing this book. I learned that even if we don't talk about racism, that doesn't mean we're not part of the problem. I learned that it's more important to talk about racism and know we're going to make mistakes and then say, "I'm so sorry, I learned from that, I'm moving on," than to not talk about it at all. I learned that it's really easy for people who look like me to identify the headwinds of racism, the ways that it might be harder for people of color to achieve success, but that it's pretty tough for us to identify those tailwinds of racism, namely all the ways that we as white people wind up getting certain boosts and privileges because of the color of our skin. Like, for example, maybe you rented an apartment because your landlord didn't want to rent to someone of color. Now, you may never have known that, but you still got the apartment. Or maybe you think, "I went to a great school because I studied really hard." Well, that's possible. Or it could have been because your mom was there to read to you every night when you went to sleep to instill values of education, and a person of color had a mom working 2 or 3 jobs who wasn't there. So he was always playing catch up in the educational system. When you start to look at things that way, what we call the American dream doesn't look quite so dreamy. So why did I write this book? Because I know what it's like to be where you are. I know what it's like to want to engage in a conversation about racism and not to have the tools or the vocabulary or the way to start. It is truly my hope that Small Great Things is a jumping off point, a springboard so that you can dive into this very messy, systemic, overwhelming conversation, so that you can have it with other people, so that you can start to make a difference, because we're not going to make a difference until we start talking about it among ourselves. So I urge you to join the conversation with me, and I hope you enjoy the book. Thanks so much.